Are you trapped and stuck in emotional cycles that make you feel stuck? I am Jennifer Evans with Empowering Wellness Counseling Solutions, and this week we're talking about the cycles that we get into. And we're talking about 5 destructive feedback loops that we all seem to find ourselves in. In my practice, I have written technically 4 books. 3 are published. One is a prequel. It's really the clinical overview of how I have built my science-based framework and how I've kind of used it in my practice. And then I realized that as much knowledge and greatness as that is, I really wanted to break it down for everybody to be able to digest it. And so I built 3 workbook series on key steps to live a happier and healthier life. And on part 2, we go into all of emotional regulation. In mastering the inner game, we start with the amygdala and being able to regulate our emotions. As we ground and find the here and now, radical acceptance, growth mindset, self-compassion, we get back and we're actually able to access our prefrontal cortex, that executive function. And we're getting some of our leadership skills that we can use to be able to influence people and kind of move forward. It causes us to find self-awareness and then be able to build social intelligence, so we really get into that interpersonal effectiveness, which is the book we're going through over these 9 weeks, going through each chapter to see how to master the networking game. And that leads us back to emotional regulation, because what happens is there's an interplay, a feedback loop between people that we're interacting with and our own emotions. They will trigger things and they will suck us back in to all of our reactionary tendencies, or ask us to implicitly comply with their reactionary tendencies. And we talked about that last week with behavior being predictable. And so the 4-part negative dynamic framework says that in psychology we have an anxious cycle. A distressing thought, feeling, or belief causes avoidance, creates a short-term kind of dopamine pool, and we feel good because we're not worried about what we once did. We said we're not going to deal with that. But it gives us long-term anxiety growth. And what I did was added the neurological component that kind of creates and reinforces our negative cycle, how we get into these traps of avoidance. And that is that long-term anxiety growth also causes long-term low capacity, that you're capable of actually doing hard things because you just ignore it. Why would you think that you can do it? It gives you low value implicitly and explicitly, a lot of devaluing that happens, which causes you to have low motivation to actually want to get into a positive cycle. And so if we zoom in with a microscope about 100 times, we get into what's called the emotional regulation negative dynamic. I have coined that term, and that says we have reactionary emotions that feed our cognitive distortions or invalid data points. It causes, number 2, attachment. Our attachment style is so prevalent. We don't realize how prevalent it is in our behaviors and getting into a negative narrative. That attachment style really feeds our negative narrative, which opens the amygdala door, and all of our past stress and trauma start to come in and create a lens in our here and now where we're interacting with other people, and we're getting into those feedback loops. It's a big part of where it is, causing perceived expectations, and then our emotional space where we either shut down or we overly express or we get anger. And so as that's happening, these 4 key points, emotional reaction, attachment, trauma and stress, and perceived expectations, are creating feedback loops. So sometimes our emotions are directly connected to our stress and trauma, and our perceived expectations, and that's the feedback loops. These triangles, I mean, I might as well be Ted Lasso with my triangles. I love them. I cannot get enough of triangles because it all makes sense, and the brain is built on these triangles. And then let's look at attachment. Attachment immediately feeds into our past stress. Something stressful has happened, and there's implicit messaging saying that either I am afraid I'm going to be abandoned, I'm afraid of being a burden, or I'm a little bit of both, which is causing emotional reactions. And attachment, our childhood is a major part of whether or not we feel we can be validated in sharing and expressing our emotions. So that one is that one right there. You may want to hold on to that one. That may be worth something one day. That's a really big part of these feedback loops. And then we have the universal constructs in the center of this square. And universal constructs, all of these, I'm going to put the video links in there so that you can go back to them. We've got a whole video on it. But the 5 things that we all need in life. And the second that kind of clicks off and we feel unsafe, we're going to these 4 corners all over again. And so how our emotions, how we connect and hear and perceive life is going to be in a direct correlation to these feedback loops. And so what you want to do is you want to be understanding what the 5 destructive feedback loops are so that you can have awareness, acceptance, actions. That is my model of growth when it comes to the treatment and that neuroscience-based framework that I use to change that brain so we're no longer emotionally reactionary. We are action-oriented and success purpose-driven. So our 5 loops are, loop number 1 is anxiety amplification. So that cognitive distortion, those invalid data points, kind of kicks in with our emotional reactions, our attachment, and our trauma. And as that's happening, our negative narrative is getting reinforced, our cognitive distortions are cranking. And it's really hard for us to see a clear reality because we're stuck in an anxious perceived reality. So we just keep getting stuck in that feedback loop. Number 2, self-sabotage through perfectionism. So that one is the attachment, trauma, perceived expectations. So usually perfectionism is more avoidant attachment type tendency. So this feeling of being a burden and I need to do this all on my own, that negative narrative starts to feed in all the trauma where we really couldn't count on people. And we were told that we really needed to do this on our own. In order to survive, we had to do it on our own. We were the only ways we would survive. And then that caused perceived expectations, what I should and could be doing to be able to own this. But what we're doing, remember, is chaos is in the wake of perceived control. So we're creating this perceived control through perfectionism, but really we're just creating a lot more anxiety-producing chaos. Number 3, trauma-driven relationship patterns. That's going to be the universal constructs, the attachment, and that trauma stress component. And that's also going to be where those drama triangles kind of start to come in. Sometimes perceived expectations is in there as well. The drama triangle is going to be, what we talked about last week is really feeding into what we expect other people should and could be doing and how we are feeding our own perceived reality. And then we have the expectation trap. Loop number 4, expectation trap. And the expectation trap says we're going to have emotional reactions because we have perceived expectations of what people are doing, emotional reactions, and it's going to start to pull into either our attachment or our trauma and that negative narrative. It's either going to hit cognitive distortions and go over to attachment, or it's going to hit the invoicing and negative narrative and hit into trauma. And that expectation trap is saying that we really expect situations to turn out in certain ways. We need things to happen, and we feel like they're falling short. And that can be for our perceived expectations, and it can be because people are not acting in a way in which we can predict or connect with or feel safe with how they're interacting with us. They're not giving value to themselves, and therefore they're not giving value to us. And that usually thwarts our ability to really effectively be present with them, or them to be present with us. And here we go, trust feedback loop. Rears its ugly head once again. It's hard not to have one of these without that trust feedback loop coming in there. It's so crucial. And then the fifth and final one is emotional burnout and shutdown. So we're really on that emotional reaction and perceived expectation. And again, we may be going through trauma, or we may go through attachment, but we're really sitting there on that burnout and shutdown. We're saying, I do not have the bandwidth for this any longer. I cannot do this. A lot of times, I always say, I work with a lot of, I have this like 40 and over kind of white men going through divorce or being threatened with divorce is a unique little population I have. I have quite a few people that are in that realm where it's like, man, you're a baby boomer, you're a Gen Xer, like, can you please have some emotional availability to me? And they really seem to love to get involved with some maybe controlling, overbearing partners. And so by the time it's all said and done for my divorcees, they are done. And I tell them, I said, you've got two options. You came at a great time. You didn't come into the second marriage, which some people do. They come into the second marriage. I'm like, man, I wish I knew you like 6 months ago, because I could have told you that this was going to happen. Because we never lose the dynamic until we're aware of what the dynamic is. We will repeat these patterns. New relationships do not get you out of these dynamics. And so what we find is that there are two types of men after divorce. The one that gets married within like a year, and the one that's like, I mean, maybe in like a decade they'll reapproach, but they are really not trying to ever get into these traps of marriage again. And that's that emotional burnout and shutdown. They just can't handle it. It's like they've served their time. They went through the prison sentence. They are not trying to get back in to this codependent relationship again. And when they fix their dynamic, they're going to realize, and they can have confidence in the boundaries that they set. But it's really hard when you've been and burned so much that you really don't want to engage. This is also where the empathy algorithm, in a couple weeks, so subscribe and stay tuned, we're going to talk about an empathy algorithm and how do you become emotionally available, because sometimes we've had so much stress in our lives that the cups are empty and we cannot fill them. That's where this emotional burnout and shutdown comes in. We really don't have the bandwidth to be present with other people. And so this is what I have for you today. We're breaking free, and how we're breaking free is we are grounding. We are realizing, we are aware of the cycles that we are getting into. We are finding grounding, being present in the here and now, so that we can take action. We find non-judgment. This is where I'm at. This is the hand that's been dealt. Let's play that game. And then you build the tools to be able to get out of this. And I've given you a lot of tools in previous videos, especially when it comes to the drama triangles and burnout and things like that, those cognitive reframing techniques. So go back to those videos and watch them. Schedule a free wellness insight. It's 15 minutes with me to ask whatever question you want. Give me whatever it is you want. I will give you the solution of why you're acting this way and what the exact thing you can do to get out of these patterns. I've got books on saying goodbye to bad brain. I've got the Key Steps series, so you can just walk through a framework of success, emotional regulation, and stay tuned. It's in editing. Very soon we're going to have that interpersonal connectedness so we can actually go through this. And we will have some other exciting things. So again, subscribe, stay connected. I've got so many great things that are coming up on the horizon, and I can't wait to share them with you.